Happy New Year's! I'm Anthony from Freedom Factory, the makers of ETH L2s and the Degen 1. Today, we're talking to Moritz from Fluidkey, a new privacy solution for ETH L2s and keeping your transactions private. We talk about smart wallets, other comparable privacy solutions, and ultimately, why Fluidkey gives users a seamless privacy experience. This is Apps Unchained.
Did living in Africa and Kenya and Nairobi, did that inspire you at all with these ideas that you're doing now?
For sure. I started using crypto also because I was just seeing a lot of problems, like for my personal use and just in general in these countries that crypto kind of solves, right? If you're saving in a currency that basically loses half of its value every year,
Yeah,
stable coins make a lot of sense.
right.
Yeah, that's one thing, and just like also being able to send money anywhere in the world very easily and so on. So these things kind of got me started, and that's how I then basically decided to also go in full time and kind of try to solve some problems, because I think UX wise there were, like, at the time I got started in crypto, there were still a lot of things that just weren't reworking, and there are still a lot of things that I think can be improved by a lot. And so that's also what encouraged me to just dive into it and kind of work in crypto full time.
That's cool. Is this your first startup in this space, or
Yeah.
have you done anything else?
No,
Okay.
it's the first startup in crypto. So I at the beginning of 2023, so like almost 2 years ago now, I started kind of looking at different problems I was having as a user, and starting to like build a lot of prototypes and thinking about a lot of these issues. And one thing I was seeing is that from a user perspective, like getting privacy that is easy to manage on public EVM chains, Ethereum, layer twos, and so on is really difficult, right? Because most wallets give you one address, and then anytime somebody sends you money or you interact with an app or anything, all of that is connected to this one address, and then anybody can kind of look that up on Etherscan and see
Hmm.
everything you've done over the past few months and years. And so that's where I kind of started thinking about that problem. And at that time, Vitalik also wrote a blog post about stealth addresses, which is the technology we're using under the hood with Fluidkey right now. And the idea is basically, instead of having one address that basically all of your assets are inside, every time you receive new assets or you transact, you basically do that from a fresh address that only you can control with the same private keys. And so instead of having one address that ties all of your activity together, you now have hundreds of addresses that are basically not connected in any way on chain. So you wouldn't be able to see that these addresses are all my address. But then in the Fluidkey interface, all of that is kind of abstracted away, and it still feels like a normal wallet where you just have one kind of balance and so on. So yeah, that's kind of how we've started with Fluidkey.
That's cool. So is it more of in like the wallet space, you would say? This is sort of a wallet interface manager.
Yeah, so the way we set it up is that you can get started without having to like kind of generate a seed phrase and then like back it up somewhere or anything like that. You have two ways of starting. Either you connect your existing wallet, so if you already have a wallet, you just connect with that, and you kind of inherit the security from that seed phrase, right? And so the other option is to just get started with Privy. So you can just connect with basically your email or your Farcaster account. And so that's an easy way to get started. But I would say, like, for more serious use, connecting with a wallet also then makes sense. And I think that's where it also ties in really well with the Degen device, because you already have a native wallet,
Hmm.
native keys, and so you can basically use these keys to create an account with Fluidkey without having to back up any other keys anywhere.
That's huge. That's super cool to think about, because like how does it actually work on the technical side? Like let's say, okay, I have my address already.
Mhm.
I connected with Fluidkey. Like, do these new addresses show up anywhere, or sort of it's all abstracted away? And on the like Etherscan or block scan,
Yeah.
whatever, do you see anything happening, or like how does that
Yeah.
work?
Yeah, so if you look at Etherscan, you just, if you know about one address, say I send money to your Fluidkey account, I would know about that one address that I send money to. And so if I look on Etherscan, it would just be a normal address that basically received the assets I sent to you, right? So if I send you some USDC, I would be able to see that there. But somebody else looking at that address wouldn't know that this is actually an address you control and that this is linked to your public profile, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way we are able to also improve the user experience and make sure that the sender doesn't have to do anything extra to basically send you money as a Fluidkey user is that we're using ENS. So every Fluidkey user gets an ENS. So you could have anthony.fkey.id, for example. And then if I type this into my MetaMask wallet, for example, it would resolve a new address that only you can control every time it's being typed in. And so I would send money to this ENS without having to understand exactly how it works under the hood. But every time I send money to that ENS, it basically sends it to a new address that isn't connected to any of the other addresses and that isn't connected to your public profile. So that's how you kind of get the privacy there.
Okay. But if someone still knows your FKID ENS type of thing, they could look at that and sort of guess. Okay.
No, because every time you query that, you literally get a new address. So every address that comes out of there, it never comes back again. Like it's a one-time thing. So if you look up my ENS right now and I do the thing at the same time, you'd get two different addresses and these addresses will never come back again.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it reminds me of sort of like, Tornado Cash, obviously, that comes into my mind because it's not the same, obviously. You are mixing on Tornado Cash these addresses you send to one and you get back from a random. But are you scared of any of the privacy implications? That like this isn't explicitly something like Tornado Cash, but of course, like this is another project in the privacy space. Even though you're still able to see, I guess, the on-chain activity of you sending to this address nobody knows. Like, is that something that you're worried about a little?
So that's actually something we've been thinking about a lot and why we kind of also like how Fluidkey is structured right now, because I think from a compliance perspective, also as a user of Fluidkey, there's much less to worry about, in the sense that every time you receive money, it is sent to an address that only you can control, right? And so you're never mixing your funds or like interacting with a contract where there could be money from bad actors, because like every address is basically separate. And then the second thing is that self addresses don't break traceability. And so what that means is that on one side, somebody can still like follow the money, right? Like they don't know that this address is your address now, but they can still look up, where these funds came from before entering that address. And so that helps, for example, at the moment you want to off ramp, it's very easy to provide, to show what the source of funds is, because that traceability isn't broken, right? And so a lot of our users are actually using Fluidkey because they want better privacy, but they also don't want to have headaches with then having to basically, explain what they did and where that money came from and so on the moment they want to off ramp it or they want to, send it to somebody else. And so yeah, that's been kind of also something we've been thinking about a lot from the beginning. I do think that Tornado Cash, like shielded pools, there's now privacy pools and so on, also something super valuable, right? So I'm not saying that this is a better technology. It's a different technology. And I think in the end, there's also, I think in the future, a path where you combine those two, right? So the way you could do that is, say you receive money to these different stealth addresses, and then one payment you receive is a huge one. Say you receive $1 million, right? If you then out of that specific address spend $1 million in small chunks, then there's a lot of activity connected to that address again, right? And so that's not great from a privacy perspective. But then these $1 million, you could put those through a privacy pool, for example. And then so something like Tornado Cash, but with also some guards to make sure that no bad actors can kind of mix money with you. And then when you move the money out of that privacy pool, you can move that into separate stealth addresses. And then these stealth addresses are basically not connected in any way. And then you have hundreds of stealth addresses of say $10,000 each and you can then spend them separately and have much better privacy there as well. Yeah, so I think these are kind of complementary technologies. We started with self addresses because from a UX perspective, it's just, I think, the easier path right now. But we're definitely looking at also other technologies to add on top of that.
Yeah, that seems huge. Um, I guess the privacy, how it's different from Tornado Cash is like on your side, right? Like you were saying, it's privacy for the user, but that privacy doesn't get mixed with other people's privacy
Yeah.
who might also want it to. I think that's huge because just like, ZK proofs and stuff, giving the power back to the user for whatever they want to do with it. I mean, the promise of blockchain of giving power back to, just like Web 1 was open, Web 3 is open, but also on the privacy side, like being able to control what you do, where your data goes, so that people don't see it. I was just looking at your guys' website. Like imagine your bank account was a public ledger and everyone could see where all your money was going. Like obviously you don't want something like that if you don't have to. And I'm surprised that tools like yours haven't even been created for something that is so used right now.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think people will kind of wake up to that and see also the need. I think as long as you're using crypto more as like a fun thing on the side, it's like privacy might not be as much of a concern, right? Like you're just minting some NFTs, doing some stuff on Farcaster, so on. But I think, we're seeing a lot of our users basically coming to Fluidkey because they're starting to, earn money on chain in different ways, whether they're creators or whether they're just getting paid for, development work they're doing and so on and so forth. And then these are, also more relevant, bigger amounts that you want to have privacy around, and you don't want your clients, for example, to see who else pays you, how much you make every month, and so on. So that's where privacy, I think, will become more and more important.
Yeah, I think it's huge, especially with the Degen 1.
Yep.
Like part of our goal, I'm sure you talked with Marcus and Nicola about this too, is like bringing the world on chain, not from just the desktop computer point of view, but into the mobile space, because it's sort of been lacking right now with the monopoly that Apple and Google have. We don't have like an easy way to interact with on chain that is seamless. When you switch to MetaMask and then it breaks or it takes a whole minute and then it doesn't work and you have to try again. As soon as we can make the onboarding and the interacting experience more seamless, like more people can use this. And back to even your point of working previously in Africa and upcoming countries that might not have a bank account, or they don't want the government to see like what they're doing. I think these technologies could absolutely work together like really, really well. Like hearing you explain the privacy point of view of it, like as more and more moves on chain, I want all my stuff to be private. Like why would I really want everyone to be able to see what I'm doing, especially if I'm making investments? One goes to the moon, I suddenly have $1 million. Like I don't
That's
need
another thing.
people tracking that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think about privacy when it's kind of almost too late, right? Like say you buy some tokens that are really cheap at that time, you don't really care about privacy. But then if you make a lot of money out of that, it's too late, right? Like if you did this with an address that is public, then anybody will be able forever to kind of look that up and see, okay, you made a lot of money with this investment, right? And so I think that's also another thing. It's like, you kind of learn from that, and then you start also thinking about privacy more seriously. At least for me, that was kind of my journey as well. Like at first, I just also had a wallet with one address, and then I started segregating different addresses, like kind of very manually. And now I'm using Fluidkey for most of these things because it's just much easier to manage and you get better privacy.
Yeah, makes sense. One of my questions I had thought about before when I was researching you guys was like, does it make sense, like, to, I guess not make sense, but like, how does it work with your original address and then the Fluidkey address? If you create a Fluidkey account, can you still go back to your original address? But I think you answered that in that it's a separate address that you like control and has its own.
Exactly. So it's the only way these are connected together is that you can use your kind of other wallet's address to connect to Fluidkey and then to kind of control your Fluidkey account with that address, but it wouldn't be tied together in any public way, right?
Unless you funded it somehow with that
Exactly.
wallet.
Like, yeah, for sure. If you send money from your like public address to your Fluidkey addresses, then there's that link on chain for sure. Um, then I think one question we're getting a lot as well often is like, okay, so what happens if Fluidkey disappears, for example, right? Like, can you recover those funds? Because I think that was also something we were really, we really wanted to make sure is very well solved before we launch anything in production. And so the way it works is that you can basically recover all of these addresses on your own. There are already like third-party recovery solutions out there for Fluidkey, where you can kind of regenerate all of the addresses that were generated through this Fluidkey ENS, and then check if there are any balances on it and control these addresses as well. So in the end, you're basically also still have that possibility of accessing your money, whatever happens to Fluidkey, right? And so I think that was really important to us.
Yeah, it makes sense. It reminds me of like how Ledger, if you connect your Ledger to Gnosis Safe and it asks you to which address are you wanting to connect, and Ledger already has like a list of, I don't know, a ton of addresses. I mean, those are all public, but that's cool. Have you followed, are you guys on Warpcast at all?
Yeah. We're pretty big users. Actually, my co-founder and I met on Farcaster.
Nice.
So we are, we're pretty big users of Farcaster.
Okay, I was gonna ask, like, what do you think of Anon and the new ZK, like, as the first kind of breakout ZK app,
Yeah.
and how that applies to you guys?
No, I think it's really interesting. I think it's cool to see like some ZK privacy related tools that are kind of being used now by a lot more people. So kind of this adoption around this, I think is very cool. And I think it's a really interesting use case as well, right? Like, so you have this account where people are posting and you don't know if it's Vitalik posting or if it's me posting, for example, right?
Yeah,
And so I really think this is an interesting concept. I think we're still just like scratching the surface as well of what's possible. I think there will be so many more, new applications and experiments happening, and I think that's also enabled by Farcaster being kind of this layer that is, anybody can kind of connect to, and a lot of stuff happening as well with AI agents, for example, and I think like the experiments happening there right now are super interesting. Really excited about what's happening there.
same. Yeah, I bought some just to test it out, and
Yeah.
I think it's super interesting. Just the promise of ZK, like being able to. There's so many like promises crypto has made that like are just starting. I think in these breakout apps that we see, like Polymarket, that got really a lot of attention. Now Anon is sort of just a breakout app in our world,
Yeah.
but I think it's more. It's these things are needed to bring people on chain, and I think we've seen the same from Vitalik lately. Like that, the apps, this app layer is really important, and we're
Yeah.
spending so much on infrastructure right now and trying to get the infrastructure right, but
Yeah.
like the apps are what actually are gonna make people come on chain, and
Yeah.
apps specifically that like people don't even know, or a lot of it's abstracted away,
Yeah.
right? Like we got into crypto, we know all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes,
Yeah.
but even your app like Fluidkey, like I don't even need to know necessarily what's happening on the back end. If
Mhm.
there's a minor explanation to it, like that's good enough for me. But if I know it's privacy preserving and I can check that, like that's so awesome.
No, that's also how we thought about, building Fluidkey, and I think there's more and more builders kind of thinking that way, right? Like we could have said, oh, let's build a privacy protocol and then, try to, build like, protocol around this and have a token and so on, and then we'll see who uses this. But we wanted to, from the beginning, also have something that end users can use and really like, get value out of. And so that's also really our goal right now, right? Like it's to build something that in the end is really valuable to our users. And yeah, we've been trying to innovate a lot also on the kind of interface and UX with, for example, ENS. I think by now every user, anytime they onboard to a new wallet or anything like that, they should just get an ENS by default, right? Like I think you shouldn't have to deal with like hex addresses and stuff like this anymore. And so I think a lot of builders are kind of also seeing this right now and building in that direction. So that's pretty exciting.
I think we're thinking the same way for the Degen 1 and for ETH Like,
Yeah.
it's also not just a way that people don't have to really know their address, but like a way that we could keep track of people who are actually using the device. If
Yeah.
you can only actually make one of these ENS addresses on the device, another way to like airdrop to just these type of users. So I think it's a super interesting space. What is like the end goal for you guys? I know your app right now already in its current state, I think does a lot, but do you see a combination with ZK
Yep.
or like the next level up that you guys are trying to get to? What's on the roadmap?
Yeah, so right now our focus, so I think privacy is one kind of starting point we've had, because that's a big problem that a lot of users have today, and we want to really give the best privacy levels in a very user-friendly way. But privacy on its own is not enough, right? Like you want to get things done in the end. You want to like, receive money, manage your assets on chain and so on and so forth. So we're working on a lot of kind of more UX focused features and a lot of new stuff coming there. So I think one thing I'm really excited about is allowing you to use stealth addresses as well with other dApps. So for example, you want to use your stealth addresses to then interact with DeFi protocols. That's something you'll be able to do pretty soon. And then also, so one thing I didn't mention before is that every address you have on Fluidkey is actually a smart account. And so what that allows you to do is to also give different authorizations and different automation kind of capabilities to these accounts, right? So I think in the future, as soon as you receive USDC, you should be able to earn interest on that USDC, for example, right? And so a lot of these things are things we're kind of exploring and playing around with. And we, in the end, want to become your kind of app to manage your funds on chain as a crypto power user. You want to have one place where you can kind of store your funds, be also be happy with the privacy you get, but also be able to just manage all of these funds in a very simple way. And so that's kind of where the direction we're going to. One feature we recently released as well is around receiving and sending bank transfers. So you can now also receive and send bank transfers directly from Fluidkey. You don't have to basically go through a centralized exchange anymore. We partnered with Bridge.xyz for that. And so you can basically, receive bank payments even from third parties directly in USDC on your Fluidkey account. And you can also send that back to, different bank accounts as well. And so the goal here as well was to just make it simpler and cut down steps that are currently like super painful for a lot of users. So we're working on a lot of features in that direction.
That's huge. That sounds awesome. Sorry for not being a power user yet, of course, of Fluidkey, but as you were explaining, you want to do stuff with these privacy accounts. Like, how does that work in the browser, and how might that work on the Degen 1? Because, like, let's say on the Degen 1, you want to interact with an app. We have the app wants to sign something, or a pop-up comes up and you sign it within their app. If Fluidkey is another app, will you switch back and forth between apps, or will you have like an app store kind of that you can use with this Fluidkey wallet?
So two things. We do want to support a lot of things just natively. So right now within Fluidkey, you can already, for example, swap or bridge without having to connect to another dApp or anything like this, right? And so the same way you can do that, you can already receive and send bank accounts. You also don't have to connect to a centralized exchange or anything like that. And so all of this is kind of hosted inside of Fluidkey. I think there are some like more long tail use cases where it's really difficult to kind of embed it inside of Fluidkey, right? So for example, a lot of our power users are also users that like to interact with different DeFi protocols, or invest in different tokens that might not be available on all decentralized exchanges and so on. And so that's why we do want to also give users the ability to then just connect one new address to a dApp and kind of do things there as well. So that feels, I think, something like where we're still figuring out exactly how the UX is, because I think it is really important to have something that doesn't feel, like you have to switch contexts like 3 times to get a transaction done, right?
Yeah.
But I'm pretty excited as well there, just around developments that are happening in that space with a few ERCs that are coming out now. So one of them is, for example, related to wallets being able to communicate with dApps and telling an app how much of a balance a user has, right? So usually what's happening today is they just look up your address, and then the app checks on chain how much balance you have. But in the case of Fluidkey, for example, you have a balance across many different addresses, right? So ideally, we should be able to tell Uniswap, okay, this user has $100,000. We're not telling you where these $100,000 are, but just trust us, build that transaction. And the moment we, the user approves the transaction, then we'll move the money just in time to the right address for you to do the swap or whatever it is you want to do. And so I think there's a lot of kind of, innovation happening also on that side with smart accounts and so on, that will make the user experience feel much better than what it is now.
Yeah, this seems like the cutting edge of what's possible right now with smart accounts and all this privacy stuff. It's really exciting. It's really cool stuff. Are you guys on base L2 or ETH mainnet?
Yeah, so we are on, I think, 5 or 6 different EVM chains. Base is kind of our default chain and the most used chain by our users. So that's where you kind of can get started when you sign up to Fluidkey. But you can also receive funds on Arbitrum, on Optimism, on Ethereum mainnet, on Gnosis, and on Polygon. So we're covering quite a few EVM chains.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. This is a super insightful conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I love what you guys are doing. I can't wait for you guys to come to the DGen one.
Love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Moritz. All right.